So state workers are going into negotiations. Their union reps are going into negotiations that just recently got started with the Office of Financial Management to negotiate what their contracts will look like for the next 2 years. But this just comes a couple of weeks after Governor Bob Ferguson and his Office of Financial Management Director came out with a stark warning about what the budget deficit could look like going into how much money we're taking in and how much money we're already promised to pay out. We're talking about a $7 to $10 billion deficit going into 2027. Not going to be easy for this next legislative session, which is the long session. Could be dragging on very long if they can't reach a budget deal. But meantime, before that even happens, OFM staff members go behind closed doors with union leadership for there's really four main state employee unions: WFSE, SEIU, and some of the others. And the taxpayer doesn't have a seat at the table. This is all done in secret. Washington state does not allow a taxpayer advocate to sit at the table and sort of advocate for you and I about, how do we feel about negotiating these large raises for the 2025 session agreement. It was a 2-year raise of 5%. So they got 3% July 1 of last year, and they're getting the additional 2% July 1 of this year. And Washington state directly employs more than 76,000 employees across the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And that's not accounting for the additional tens of thousands of state workers, people that work for the University of Washington. And UW has the highest paid state employees. And then the rest of them, DSHS and DOT workers, Department of Corrections employees, these are some of the largest chunks of the pie for state workers. And again, with this backdrop of facing a potential budget deficit of $7 to $10 billion, and these closed door negotiations taking place with union leadership and OFM staff, without the taxpayer having a seat at the table, a lot of questions. And we don't get to find out until all is said and done. And I shared some of this conversation with you last week, but I want to share another part of my conversation with Washington State Policy Center's Ryan Frost. He heads up their Tax and Budget Center. And he and other conservative lawmakers have for years said, we got a problem, Washington State. Why are these negotiations done behind closed doors? Again, we're talking about up to 30% of the entire massive state budget is going to pay state workers. And it's like Joe taxpayer, you went out to dinner with all the state workers and they said, "Oh, at the end of it, by the way, you didn't know you were paying the bill. Here's the bill." And "Oh yeah, we didn't tell you that every state worker ordered steak and lobster, but it's on you, Joe. Sorry, this is just how it works." That's kind of how these negotiations go. And Ryan Frost at WPC has some concerns about that. He also raises um, the interesting point that maybe there's a conflict of interest here because you have these giant state union negotiations taking place when all these union dollars go to the very people that the negotiations take place with.
If you look at who they contribute to with all their money, it's going to the people they're negotiating their upcoming raises with, and that's just a rather large conflict of interest. And it's been an issue for a number of years now, the fact that these negotiations are hid behind closed doors. If you look at the growth in overall comp just over the last 4 years, it's been about a 30%. The state spends about 30% more on its workforce today than it did in 2022. And I totally get it. It's not that I want public employees to be broke and make no money. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the state is broke, and there has to be trade-offs. And right now the trade-off is we're funding the compensation increases and we're cutting like pretty important programs that people are relying on.
So we shared with you last week how much some of the highest paid state employees are making, and this is based on 2025 salaries. University of Washington's head football coach makes the most, 5.9 million last year. It shows he actually took a pay cut from 2024. He made nearly twice what the head UW men's basketball coach made, but the athletics director and a lot of other, athletics UW employees, assistant coaches, and that are all making well over $1 million. And then Department of Corrections makes up another big chunk of the budget for state employee salaries. Um, there are more than 9,000 workers in DOC. They operate, 11 prisons, 1,300 reentry centers. And, the top DOC workers are the ones who are the nursing staff. And they, face a lot of uh, it's a dangerous work environment. So there are several hundred DOC workers that are making two, three, $400,000 a year. Good chunk of that's probably overtime. And then there's DSHS, and the Department of Children, Youth, and Families falls under that umbrella for that state agency. They're the largest state agency, and that's another big chunk of the budget. We had DCYF Secretary Tonna Sen rather paid 244,000 plus last year. There are several hundred DCYF employees making upwards of 150, $200,000 a year. Now, obviously, state government services to the most vulnerable are critical, and many of those employees should, many could argue, be compensated well for the work that they do. But given the spending problem that the majority party has in Washington state and these ongoing negotiations for how big of a raise they're going to get for the next 2 years, it's pretty critical that we find out more, if at all possible. And open government advocates have been trying to kind of sound the alarm on this for years to no avail. Unfortunately, at this point, there doesn't seem to be much of an appetite for opening up those negotiations to, the taxpayer who would like to shine a little bit of light on this. But really, once the negotiation's a done deal, come the 1st of October, governor comes out with his budget and he has a look at it. Lawmakers then only have the opportunity to say yay or nay. It's an up or down vote. They don't get to go back on the employee salary negotiations and say, hey, wait a minute, we don't think 5% is good. We can only afford really 3 or 4%. Go back and renegotiate. No, it's an up or down vote at that point. So it's really interesting how that process happens here in the state of Washington. Is interesting today with my article coming out on the state employee salaries that the Department of Retirement Systems put out a notice to state workers today saying, by the way, July 1 is when your new pay hike kicks in. State employees, you're going to notice you got that little 2% pay hike on your latest couple of paychecks. And here's what we think you should do with it. They're telling them they sent this notice out that says, this 2% is meant to help you with the cost of inflation. And one of the best things you can do is to pay off some of your bills. They suggest things like this: use your pay bump to pay off your credit card debt. That's always a good idea. Save for a vacation. They say maybe open an account or add to your kids' 529 college savings fund. That's the state's college savings program. Um, I'm going to include this in my article to be published today on our Washington, the Center Square page. But state employee compensation has risen by about 30% since 2022. That's only 4 years ago. 30% increase in state employee. Some of that is the numbers of state employees that have gone way up. Some of that is also because there are some great big pay raises and a lot of overtime for state workers. It's also interesting to notice that that is exactly how much of the total pie, it's up to 30%, the total piece of the pie, the state budget that goes to salaries. So I just found those numbers to be pretty interesting. And I did reach out to the four largest state employee union, the presidents of these unions that go into these closed door sessions and said, "Hey, what are you asking for? And because of this deficit projection, are you going to maybe say, oh, let's not go in for the 5%, let's only ask for 3% this year because we're not likely to get our 5%." I only got one response, and I want to make sure I get this right. That was from the Professional and Technical Employees Local 17. Their leadership responded said they were unable because of the negotiations to grant me an interview today, but they did ask for a list of questions and promised a response, which I will include in my article. But if I do, in fact, get a follow up interview, which I have since gone back and said, hey, I'd still love to get you on video, I will include that in our podcast episode on Wednesday, in fairness to them, to, say this is we're lobbying for our members to get more, and this is why we think we deserve that in today's episode. Now let's dive in. The value of your home, imagine it goes way up. Many of us, that's happened in the last few years, but our property taxes go down. That's not what most of us have seen, but that's what's happening in Quincy. Now, imagine you also have a brand new police station, fire station, EMT stations, a new water system, new sewer system, a brand new high school, a brand new hospital, and your taxes didn't go up at all. That is what has been happening in Quincy, Washington. For those not familiar, it's located mostly in central Washington, kind of south of Wenatchee, in that part of the state. Pretty hot this time of the year. Now, Microsoft built a massive data center there in Quincy more than 2 decades ago. It was Microsoft's very first data center in the entire world. And they selected that area in part because of a lot of open space, cheaper land, of course, than locating in Western Washington, and also because Grant County PUD had put in fiber optic lines. They did that because the area is prone to some storms, and it was basically about putting in fiber so they could quickly locate when they had some kind of a glitch on their transmission system, rather than having to send technicians out in the field. They could actually just locate it instantly and find out where the problem was. But that literally laid the groundwork for Microsoft to go, aha, Quincy, cheap land, lots of space. They've got fiber lines, which we need to operate our data centers. And that's what prompted them to locate in Quincy more than 2 decades ago. Well, the example of how taxpayers can benefit from data centers and not be victimized from them was the topic of a pretty fascinating webinar that I took part in on Tuesday. It was led by the National Taxpayers Union, and they talked in that webinar about Quincy, Washington's economic boom.
We have a lawmaker from Quincy, Washington State, talking about what the lawmaker calls a Quincy miracle. 7 data centers, no electric rates were increased. They use 5% of the city water. There is no noise. Data centers pay 57% of all taxes. And there's everything from new streets to sidewalks to schools that are being put up because of this increase in the tax base. That's certainly a way to do it right. There's concern among communities that it could be done wrong. Yeah, understood. And our biggest challenge, I think, is convincing folks that they have it within their power to properly manage the development to their advantage without just saying, no, we don't want to do it ever, go away.
I confess to being no expert into data centers. I've heard a lot of the arguments on both sides of the issue in the Washington state legislature during session the last few years. A lot of concerns raised now by environmentalists about water and drain on the power grid. But I've learned a lot in the last couple of days. And so, again, as I mentioned, I took part in that webinar put on by the National Taxpayers Union. And their take is that American taxpayers can really benefit from data centers. And they kind of took an opportunity to dispel some of those myths, they call them, about concerns with water and power drain, because the evidence, at least in Quincy and many of these other communities that have had data centers for a long while, it hasn't driven up utility bills. It has not been a drain on the water supply, but rather an economic force for good. And again, as I mentioned, they brought up Quincy. Now, the lawmaker they referenced there is Representative Alex Ibarra of Quincy. So I reached out to him this morning and got an interview. And I thought this was fascinating. He told me the poverty rate in Quincy, large Hispanic community, it's an egg community, plummeted from above 30% down to below 15%. So basically, cut in half their poverty rate because of the economic force of data centers. And the data centers are now chipping in more than half of the tax base for the entire community, which has provided this great big old piggy bank for Quincy to go, what do we need? What do we want? We need a new fire station, a new police station. Let's hear more on that from Representative Alex Ibarra.
A new police station, and these are all brand new buildings. A new police station, a new city hall, a new public works building, a new EMS, two EMS systems or stations for ambulances. Um, let me see, a brand new hospital that was just opened 6 months ago, the best high school in the state of Washington, which was a bond for $108 million for a little town of Quincy. Um, every prior to data centers, about 60% of the roads were paved. Now 100% of the roads are paved. We had 20% coverage on sidewalks. Now it's 100% sidewalk coverage, or probably 90% sidewalk coverage in the whole town. We have a new sewer system, changed out all the pipes. We have new water systems. We have a reuse water system that Microsoft built for the city of Quincy on their nickel, and they gifted it to the city of Quincy. Um, let's not forget about the aqua park that's going to open on July 3rd of this year, which has slides, brand new swimming pool, brand new 5 or 6 different slides. It's got a little kids pool. It's got a lazy river in Quincy. We're talking this little podunk town, right? Next year, we're going to build an indoor football soccer field in town, indoor, because it gets really hot in summer and really cold in the winter. And it's going to have an indoor walking, running track. It's going to have tennis courts, pickleball courts, basketball courts, all happening.
Now, he told me that massive Microsoft data center, the first one they built anywhere in the world, is located 2 blocks from his home. He pointed out the window while we were talking on our Zoom interview this morning. He said, I can see it. He says, I've never heard it, ever heard anything, any noise coming from the facility. And that, again, has been one of the things that critics have brought up, that these big data centers are going to be, environmentally noise hazardous. Um, uh, Representative Ibarra said he does understand people bringing up very legitimate concerns about drain on utilities, on power, and on water. But he said that those concerns, at least in Quincy, have proven to be unwarranted.
We pulled the meter readings from the data centers. The city of Quincy gave me that information. The data centers use 5% of the water. The food producers, Lamb Weston and Quincy Foods, and I think Amway, those three companies use 57% of the water for the crops, right? Because they make French fries, they have to clean up the potatoes with water, apples, pears, cherries, which is Quincy's a farm community. So they use 57% of the water. Microsoft uses 5%. The small businesses and homes use 33% of the water. All of the data centers combined use 5% of all the water in Quincy. So they don't use all the water. They have closed loop systems now, not like the old days. So they're all closed loop systems. Again, yeah, so that's the deal. 5% of the water, not 50%, not 75, it's 5%. So they're not taking up our water.
Now, earlier this year, Washington lawmakers once again pursued legislation. This year, it was about requiring data centers to cover costs associated with energy deployment and generation. But that could have quelled some of the public concerns being raised by people. And the bill did pass the House, but then it died in the Senate after Microsoft came out vehemently opposed. Representative Ibarra was also one of those who gave a passionate speech against this bill. And again, it ended up dying in the Senate. Um, this is one more figure I want to bring you from Quincy, because again, I've learned a lot just in the past day and a half about what it has done for that otherwise, before the data centers, pretty depressed community. Their tax rates dropped from roughly $3 per thousand of assessed value on a home to less than $1 per $1,000 of assessed value. And that's because the data centers, the corporate taxes from data centers, are paying 57% of all the taxes in Quincy. So it's everybody else in Quincy, the other 43%, that have to make up for the other tax revenue. So even though the value of your home goes way up, your tax rate has gone way down. And also, I should mention, at that new high school, which I guess is the biggest and newest in the entire state, they've got a program to train up these data center technicians. So there's a pipeline directly from high school graduation into a path of employment. So the debate, no doubt, is going to continue, but more education all the way around on both sides and dispelling some of these myths and the potential benefits for taxpayers is warranted. The Washington Supreme Court races are getting a lot of attention this year, and we've been paying a great deal of attention to them in our daily podcast. And that's because there are more open positions than ever, 5 of the 9 races on the ballot this year. And of course, we have the potential income tax challenge out there that will likely eventually make its way to the state's high court. Now, Justice Colleen Melody was appointed earlier this year by Governor Bob Ferguson. So she is one of the new justices on court this year. Justice Theo Angelis is the other one. Colleen Melody, previously worked in the office of the Attorney General, while now Governor Bob Ferguson served as AG. And then Ferguson appointed Melody about a month before, publicly calling on lawmakers, the governor, to pass the income tax. Now, the appointee, Colleen Melody, has also donated to Bob Ferguson's campaign and also to AG Nick Brown's campaign. Nothing illegal about that. It's important to point out. But critics have been arguing that those ties could raise, recusal questions if the income tax case does reach the high court. So my colleague Tim Clauser pressed Colleen Melody in an exclusive interview about that very question and whether or not she thinks she should step aside from a future income tax case.
Given those relationships, the donations, and the AGO's role in defending the state's tax position, do you think that your impartiality could be reasonably questioned if the income tax case comes to the bench? And if so, would you or would you not recuse yourself?
So that case is not here, and I don't prejudge any request for recusal that might come when it comes. As I understand from media reporting, that may be going on the ballot. And so if anything, that case is months or years away. And so I'm not going to prejudge any recusal request because that would be inappropriate. The whole point is that, we wait for the cases on the facts and the law as they come. And I imagine, although I don't know, but I imagine that, one of my opponents who is a experienced tax lawyer would say the same thing, right? I don't think that he would think that he was unable to comply with his oath of office. And on the tax, I'm not sure how it cuts for me. Retired Justice Phil Talmadge, who is one of the lawyers working on that case, as I understand it, has endorsed me. So I don't know if that means, on this view that I have to recuse myself. This argument just doesn't have a beginning or an end to it, really, in a society where First Amendment rights allow people to endorse candidates, to oppose candidates, right? It's not clear to me where this begins or ends. If the idea is that anytime we're supported by somebody, then that means we can't separate our own judgment from theirs.
So some of these 5 Supreme Court races have more than a handful of candidates vying for those positions. Voters have a chance to weigh in at the August 4th primary, and each of those fields will be narrowed down to 2. We have a top 2 primary in the state of Washington. Of course, those Supreme Court races are considered nonpartisan, though you can sort of tell where political leanings are for those candidates by just looking at public disclosure campaign donations for them. But again, after the August 4th primary, we'll have those fields narrowed down to the top 2 vote getters for each of those positions. They will then advance on to the November general election ballot.